So quick formal introduction, I'm Guy Letts. I lead from CustomerSure on most of our implementations. And over the last 12 years, we've learnt really quite a huge amount. We've helped hundreds of companies around the world to start measuring and improving customer satisfaction and collecting customer feedback. And in these webinars, the reason why we run them, we're simply sharing what we've learnt. We want to help people who are starting out or people who've made a start, but they're not getting the benefits that they think they should. Of course, we'd love to work with you. If there's an opportunity, we'd love to chat with you. But honestly, whether you end up using our software or somebody else's software today, we're just aiming to help. We just want to save you time, and we want to help you make your program a huge success. So Net Promoter Score, CSAT, effort score, we hear a lot about these metrics, don't we? And people have mixed views on them, especially if you follow any of the discussions on LinkedIn. So are any of them really any good? And if so, which one should I pick? And then if I do pick one, how do I then go on and make sure I'm successful with it? That's what we're going to cover in the next 30 minutes, 30 seconds, we wish. That's what I'm going to cover in the next 30 minutes. So first of all, how do we know if they're any good? Well, we ask Google, obviously. This was my first page of search results. Let's try NPS as an example of one of them and see what Google says, see what the internet's answer is are they any good? Well, Google's sitting on the fence. So, of course, what you have to bear in mind when you're researching any of these and investigating, it's big business. NPS, Net Promoter Score, is a big money maker for its creators. We have to pay a license fee to be able to sell software which supports NPS. And Bain, one of the creators of it, they make a tidy sum from selling NPS services, and I'm sure they do a great job. But because NPS is very popular, it can be profitable for some commentators and some people on the internet to have a pop at it. If they write something controversial, it's like clickbait. It gets them attention, and they can profit from that because they've got people's attention, and they may be able to benefit from that. But of course, debate isn't necessarily a bad thing. If they have a pop at it constructively, well, we should think critically about the tools and techniques we use. But I just thought I'd mention that because I think it's important to be aware of people's motives and the different perspectives that they might have, because some of the stakeholders do have an axe to grind one way or the other. You might just want to apply that filter when you're reading the debates. And actually, some of the criticisms are valid, but every technique, of course, they do have strengths and weaknesses. That doesn't mean you shouldn't use one. Full disclosure, here at CustomerSure, we're neutral on the topic. We do pay our NPS license fee, and we do see great value in NPS, and we've got customers who've got fabulous results from it, but we're not wedded to any one particular technique. And many of our customers actually choose not to use the NPS features in our software, and there's no impact on us financially whether they do or don't. But it's fair to say, I think, even amongst the most neutral of commentators, that there are conflicting views about the strengths and weaknesses. So I wonder why you think that is. Why do some people think it's the best thing since sliced bread, and some people feel that its shortcomings are too great? Well, here are some facts from my personal experience, which I think shed some light on it. I started work in the manufacturing sector in 1984. And before that, when I was growing up and going through education in the 1970s, I remember in the UK, there were dominant, homegrown British car and motorcycle industries. Nearly everybody in the country drove a British Ford or a Vauxhall or a British Leyland car, if you remember them, or maybe they rode on a British Triumph motorbike. But really, it seemed like only in the space of a few short years, the Japanese came in and they completely swept those markets. They brought more features, and more importantly, perhaps, the quality and reliability of the vehicles were far and away better. They got consistency, they got quality, they got reliability, and that was very attractive to people. To achieve that level of quality, the Japanese manufacturers used a methodology called Kaizen. You can see it on the slide in the 1980s row. Now, to try and compete, because obviously they were eating our lunch, to try and compete, UK companies started to adopt these Japanese techniques. They studied them, they tried to adopt them, and not just manufacturing companies, actually. The principles became very fashionable in many sectors of business. But unfortunately, what those companies didn't adopt that made the Japanese principles so successful was the working culture and the approach and thinking behind them. They thought the tools themselves were the magic ingredient. So when copying the Japanese techniques didn't work in this country, we gave up and we tried a British approach instead. And the British approach was about documenting every procedure quite rigorously. And the accreditation you needed was called British Standard. It was a BS 5750 or International Standard, ISO 9000 as it became known. Specifying everything on paper was now the magic ingredient for success. And back then it actually was on paper. Well, we haven't abandoned ISO 9000, it's still around. But most people, I think, now have realistic expectations of what it can and can't deliver. Although it has value, I don't think anybody would see ISO 9000 as a revolutionary game changer. So by 2000s, the British approach hadn't yielded a magic improvement in product quality and service either. So we thought we'll try a hotshot American method. Six Sigma and a lean approach to business were pioneered by Motorola in America and then adopted by General Electric under another, who were another huge American company. And that was under the famous leadership of Jack Welch. Many books have been written about him. And that approach was all about reducing variability in manufacturing and reducing variability in business processes and using a statistical approach to quality management. So Six Sigma is all about reducing process variability to less than 6 standard deviations. And just down the road from where I'm sitting, actually, there's a big government building. And the civil servants got consultants in to help them implement a lean methodology. And what that ended up meaning was they put tape on everyone's desks to show where your phone should be, where your stapler should sit, where your pencil, your ruler. It was all supposedly about gaining efficiency by being ruthlessly consistent. Well, you can guess whether it did the job, and I'm sure you can guess how much taxpayers' money it cost, and I'm sure you can have a view on what it might have done to morale of the people working there. But you can perhaps see a pattern with those successive attempts. Despite the high uptake, Six Sigma hasn't conquered quality and service problems either. And so it's largely been superseded by yet another set of methodologies and metrics, and they're the ones that we're familiar with and we're talking about today. And no doubt there's more coming down the pipe too. But by now, if these tools and techniques delivered even half of what they promised, even half of what the books written about them claimed, our life as customers in the market buying stuff, it should be absolutely fantastic, shouldn't it? If it was as easy as adopting one of these approaches, then our satisfaction should be off the charts. So, we've cracked it, we've solved the problem. Every company we deal with should be brilliant. Well, sometimes it is. There are definitely some stars. We'll all have our favorites. It might be Apple, Amazon, John Lewis, Greg's, I like. Probably not Ryanair. But how's your bank, your energy company, your mobile phone operator, your broadband provider, your insurance company? Are they all so pleasurable to deal with that you'd never want to go anywhere else, and that you'd always be happy to recommend them to a mate? Well, perhaps unless your experience is very different from mine, we haven't reached that point yet. But don't write these methods off completely. There are definitely some strengths and good principles in all of them. Of course, if some companies hadn't had great success with them, then they wouldn't have caught on at all, and other people wouldn't have wanted to copy them. Toyota is still using Kaizen. Its value to them hasn't diminished, and the way they use it is still delivering benefits to them. Some parts of Toyota are actually using NPS now too. So all of the tools can add value, but only if they're applied in the right way. So what's going on? Why do these customers work in some companies, but not in others? Well, here's where I think it goes wrong. there's a flawed assumption and people overestimate the role that the tool itself in isolation plays in getting a successful outcome. I want to be as good as this guy, so I'll copy the tools he's using. Well, I'm sure Djokovic's racket sponsor wants us to think it's all down to the racket, and that's why they pay him a fortune. But deep down, we know it's never just about the tool. It's always about how you use it. I remember once I played a UK amateur squash champion. It was only because he joined the company I was working for, and he had he decided he wanted to join the work squash ladder when we played at lunchtimes. In the games he played against us workmates, he tried ever so hard to even things up and make it a decent game. He had a good racket too. So when he played, we swapped rackets, and he played with his left hand, his wrong hand. But even with those handicaps, he still sent me, I remember it, flailing around the court, and I didn't take a single point off him. There's no doubt, of course, a fabulous racket will help. His was great. I bought one. But I still never took a point off him. And I think that's because the critical factors in sport are the commitment, the fitness, the skills, the experience, the psychology, even the supporters who turn up and cheer on the day. So lots of other factors are at play, and they all make a huge, apologies, they all make a much bigger difference to the outcome than the choice of tool. And I think that's what's going on with our methodologies. The problem is that extraordinary claims are made for the tools, like these claims for Net Promoter, and in part that's because some people are trying to make money out of it. And because of the claims, the expectations of the tool itself skyrocket. But when it fails, well, then they go on and look for another tool, even though it failed because it hadn't been used properly. So back to our Google results. Look at that link to the article from Forbes, where it says it's time to retire Net Promoter Score, and here's what to replace it with. And below it, a snippet from the same publication, even more recently, questioning the effectiveness of Kaizen. Yes, it is still around. When you make it all about the tool, clearly, as you see here, you'll never be satisfied. There's always the search for the next best thing. Djokovic could beat me at tennis if he played with a cricket bat, even if he used his wrong hand. So a good tool helps, of course it does, but it's not the deciding factor. So let's not write them off. Let's work out what else we need to do to make them successful. Then it becomes a much better question: how can I use the tools to make a positive impact on my business? And let me say, if you are starting out on a project like this, or if you have made some progress, you're doing a brilliant thing. When I was customer service director at a whopping big company, of all the initiatives we tried to improve customer experience and not to put too fine a point on it, put more money on the bottom line, the most successful thing we tried by far was collecting customer feedback, acting on it, and improving the experience of customers. It added literally millions of pounds to the bottom line in that company. So don't worry, any of these metrics can deliver good results, maybe even a combination of all of them. And thirdly, this is the lesson that we've just learned, I think. Do understand that the factors that are much more influential than which metric you choose. Never forget that your feedback process is part of the customer experience too. Most of the surveys I receive are pretty awful, and the follow-up is usually non-existent, which is a shame actually, because measuring satisfaction is only half the job. If you don't follow up appropriately, then you've done nothing to improve satisfaction. You've measured it, but you haven't taken that opportunity to improve it, which is a missed opportunity for your business, but it's an even bigger disappointment to the customer who gave you feedback. Perhaps it was a cry for help and they've heard nothing back. Fourthly, encouraging to stick with it, but once you've started, I don't think you'll need any encouragement, because you'll constantly be finding nuggets of gold in the comments from customers. And you can definitely refine the process as you build confidence in it, and over time as you get better at applying it across your business. And you find that more people see what you're doing and say, wow, that data could help me do my job better. How can I share that in them? Even if you're trying to promote it throughout your company, you don't have to say, this is great, you should use it. Once they see the benefits that you're getting, they'll want to do it themselves. So now let's go across the pros and cons of the current crop of tools and choose the best fit. So Net Promoter was developed by a chap called Fred Reichelt in conjunction with Bain, the consulting firm. And they did some research with some large companies. And over time, they found there was a correlation between the scores that customers gave in response to a very particular question that they settled on, and whether that company was likely to grow or shrink in the following years. And they found that if there was a positive score in the formula that they distilled out of it, then that company was likely to grow. And the higher the score, the more the growth is likely to be. So Net Promoter is based on the question we're now familiar with. How likely would you be to recommend our company to a friend or a colleague? It's usually on a 0 to 10 scale. And the definitions here, the 0 to 6 are called detractors. This is just the terminology that's used. 7 and 8 are called passives, and 9 and 10 are promoters. Incidentally, when you're asking if you do use NPS, you shouldn't use a color-coded scale and you shouldn't put any words on it. The research and the methodology was validated on just a vanilla 0 to 10 scale. So this diagram here is just to show and explain how the responses are classified. It's a fairly simple calculation. Your Net Promoter Score is the percentage of people who respond who score you 9 and 10 minus the percentage of respondents who score you 0 through 6. And the result will be a number between minus 100% and plus 100%. As we said, the higher the positive score, the better things are. Now, the thing to remember about Net Promoter Score, it's a measure of the company as a whole. It's people expressing their satisfaction, expressing their likelihood, if you like. How prepared are they to put their personal reputation on the line and recommend your company to another person, confident that how much confidence have you given them that you'll do a great job for anybody who comes along, not just them. So it's great for understanding retention. Is this person happy enough to stay, or are they on the verge of leaving? Whether they're confident to recommend you. But it doesn't tell you why. And more importantly, it doesn't tell you how you're doing at all those factors that the customers want you to be good at. You know, those things that they hired you for in the first place. So it's not good for quality control or for diagnosing problems and pinpointing them in specific areas. And by itself, it doesn't give you any information that helps people to improve their skills and performance. So sometimes it's billed as the ultimate question. I think the book's called The Ultimate Question, or The Only Question You'll Ever Need. But really it isn't. And actually, it's not a very customer-centric question itself either, but there's definitely a place for it. So let's look at the specific pros and cons. It's popular with many customer service professionals because they're familiar with it. It's dead simple for customers. Everybody can understand a 0 to 10 scale. It's a higher bar. It's a more exacting questions. If I'm satisfied, if you ask me if I'm satisfied, well, I might be satisfied. I'll put up with a few foibles, but am I satisfied enough to be able to recommend you? And well, I'm not sure if I would. So it's a more exacting question. It's good for that across the board. How do I feel about your company? And the process, if you follow it properly, as it's prescribed and written in the book, then it does highlight the importance of following up appropriately when you do receive responses. Remember, those follow-up activities are the difference between just measuring customer satisfaction and actually doing something to improve it. There's a farming expression: you don't fatten a pig by weighing it more often, and I think there's some truth in that. The disadvantages: it measures loyalty, but it doesn't measure quality. It doesn't give you diagnostics in a particular area. This is a funny one. It can frustrate new customers if you ask them too early. And I liken this, forgive the illustration, but I liken it to going on a date and saying to the person sitting opposite you, do you love me? Well, it's a great question for the right time, but ask it too early and it's really a bit weird. Another disadvantage, the NPS calculation is not well understood. It's dead simple, but not people don't understand how it's calculated, and that can mean the interpretation and the actions on the back of it is sometimes difficult to work out what should be done. And it doesn't tell you those specific things. You know, customers want you to be good at certain things. You know, if you're good at selling products, they want you to be easy to order, fast to ship them, quality to be good, that kind of thing. To understand satisfaction fully, you're going to want to work out how good you're doing on those things that are really important to customers, so that you can make sure that you're firing on all cylinders. Okay, pros and cons of CSAT. Well, it's really flexible. It's not prescriptive like Net Promoter Score. There's no formula defined for it. Different people can apply it in different ways. You can take an average of a score. You can categorize it into people who are satisfied or very satisfied and treat that as your CSAT score. So it's very flexible, and it's great for measuring actually quality. It's good for saying how satisfied were you with the quality of our products, or how satisfied were you with the quality of our customer service or the professional services that we delivered. So also dead simple, perhaps a bit more flexible than Net Promoter, but remember the bar's a bit lower. I can be satisfied, but I might not be quite satisfied enough to recommend you. So as I say, it's a weaker test, and it's better for retention. It's better for working out whether a particular person's satisfied enough to stay with you themselves than whether they're happy to refer you to somebody else. Customer effort score, let's do the same, pros and cons. This is more about measuring the quality of interactions. It's about measuring the satisfaction with the process. So it does make you more efficient. It does help you pinpoint those things that are perhaps causing friction in the process of dealing with customers. It helps you smooth out the wrinkles. It can save you money. It can help you identify areas where there's perhaps complexity that you can simplify and reduce costs. And it does tell you, if you ask this at the appropriate points in the customer journey, it does tell you where customers are finding you easy to deal with and what they're having problems with. Downsides, well, it focuses on processes, not people. How easy are we to deal with? How good are our systems? How well do our policies suit you? All valid questions, all things that you want to get information about, improve, but satisfaction is all about people, not about processes. So it doesn't really give you an insight into how the customer feels. And it doesn't give you necessarily information about the quality of the things you're measuring. And neither does it give you the thing that NPS gives you, which is a measure of, does this person love us to bits, or are they just hanging in there and maybe looking over your shoulder for somebody else? So, well, ultimately, just choose one or more that you like, and apply it consistently across your organization. You've seen the strengths and weaknesses of the different tools. There is value in using a combination of them, as long as you do it intelligently. You know, if you want a Net Promoter Score, the temptation is to apply it to every touch point. But as we've seen, it's a bit awkward for the customer asking you if they'd recommend you, if you ask that too early. Well, yeah, I don't know you yet. I haven't had a chance. Why? That's a difficult question. So I don't want to commit and say I would, because when I get to know you a bit more, I might not. So very importantly, think about that follow-up, the importance of follow-up that we talked about. Yes, it's lovely to get high response rates. It's lovely to get the data in, but the customers only benefit when you do something on the back of the feedback. You know, when you receive those cries for help, say, oh my goodness, there's a customer at risk here, I'm going to jump on this and save them. So before you go live with any feedback, make sure you've thought through, you've designed your strategy for how you're going to respond immediately. When necessary, it's not always necessary, or you might, you know, some comments might come in with compliments for people or suggestions for improvement. All the customer would reasonably expect then is just a nice reply. That's a great suggestion. Thank you very much. Do you know what? Going to plan that in. Or that is a good idea. We have thought about it. Here's why we're not going to do it. You know, they're reasonable. But goodness me, somebody's read my feedback and they've given me an intelligent response. Well, I don't normally get that. That's really impressed me about your customer. But of course, retaining at-risk customers, that opportunity for service recovery, that's when this thing delivers pound notes to your bottom line. That's another customer that you don't have to win back through the front door. You haven't lost them through the back door. How do you pick between them? Well, I think I've given you some tips. Actually, using them judiciously, a combination of all of these can be beneficial. If you just want to use one, CSAT's always a safe choice. It's simple, it's flexible. You can start with one, crawl, then walk, adopt one or two more, then run, adopt them all, and apply them appropriately. But the way to think about it, the ultimate choice is when you're asking a feedback question, whether it's one of these metrics or whether it's how friendly and helpful were we, or how quickly did we answer the phone to you, always choose the questions that you think the customers, always ask about what the customers would have wanted you to be brilliant at the time you're asking. Use that as kind of a litmus test for whether you got the right questions or not. And if those are what the customer would, if that's what they wanted you to be brilliant at that time, those are the right questions. Just a few pitfalls, bear traps to avoid falling into. Don't over rely on the metric. We've seen that, we've done that to death. They're brilliant, these techniques, but they're not a magic wand. Secondly, don't get hung up on the scores. Everybody wants a high score, of course we do. But have you thought about the fact that the low scores are the ones that make you most money? If you get a low score, that's actually a cry for help from a customer who really doesn't want to switch supplier. You've given them a lifeline, you've sent them the opportunity to give feedback. They've said, this is my problem. You go in, you fix it. Well, you save that customer, and actually customer retention is more money on the bottom line. Much easier to save a customer than to win a new one. Said it starkly here, failure to follow up means you're happy to lose customers. I have to say that is true, and I think as customers we all see that more clearly sometimes than when we're working in business. And finally, never set targets. Never ever set bonuses on customer satisfaction scores. I do get a lot of pushback on this one, so I'm just going to, I think I'm on minus five seconds of the half hour here, but just to sneak this one in. This is why you should never set targets for scores. All the good, wholesome things here that your customers want you to be brilliant at, you want to be brilliant at, these are the things that affect customer satisfaction. But these other things, the type of scale you use, whether you score it on a 0 to 10 scale, or whether you try and play mind games to get a higher number by making it a 10 to 0 scale, put the positive comments on the left, not on the right, or you'll be getting a survey, a 9 or 10 doesn't make a difference. I'll be able to buy the kids some Christmas presents. That if you set a target on the score, anybody can make the number higher. And I see it every day actually, and I can tell when I get a survey, these people have been targeted on the score because they're trying to manipulate it upwards with these things. If you set targets for targets are brilliant, but set them for these things in green instead, and then you will get a higher satisfaction score, but you'll be getting it for the right reasons. Contact details, we'll follow up in an email. We'll send a copy of the video. Sorry I went a couple of minutes over. Apologize, there's not time for questions, but if you do have any individual questions, do get in touch. We'd love to do a one-to-one session with you. We'll send you a feedback form and lots of other useful stuff. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you have a good afternoon.